fight. They let America take over, complaining about Reagan's might.
The collapse of the revolution. The month of October bears historic significance to us here in Grenada and the wider Caribbean, I dare say, as Grenada's participation in the Cold War came to an abrupt end with a US-led military intervention which was necessary to restore order to the Sunshine State, which had 1 week before experienced the execution of its revolutionary Prime Minister and some of his cabinet ministers at the hands of what was referred to as a military junta. Please be advised that the following would be taken from Chapter 11 of my still-to-be-published account of the history of Grenada titled, This is My Island. The events which triggered the October 1983 crisis and subsequent US and Allied forces invasion began in October of 1982, when Prime Minister Bishop was pressured to bar Cuban Ambassador Julian Rizzo from further attendance at cabinet meetings. This served to anger the Soviets and Cubans and estranged the Bishop faction from hardline Grenadian Marxists believed to be led by Bernard Cord, then Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. It is also said, though never substantiated, that the rumor of a rift in the leadership of the party manifested itself since then, and Bishop was forced to come out on radio around midnight one night to make a statement asking people to desist from spreading rumors for fear that anyone found to be participating in any such rumor will be placed under heavy manners. It is said that the faction of the NGM, which was led by Bernard Cord, was known as OREL, Organization for Revolutionary Education and Liberation. This grouping, phantom or real, was believed never to have fully integrated with the charismatic and accepted faction led by Maurice Bishop. This is where the perceived hardlined communist influence in the NGM originated, and it was thought that Bishop did not stand a chance. It is suspected further that on account of the worsening of relations between Bishop and Cord and the former's reluctance to speed up the rate at which Grenada were to be transformed into a Marxist-Leninist state contributed to an effort on the part of Bishop to better relations with the United States. Prime Minister Bishop, who had only recently returned from an official visit to the state of Czechoslovakia and Hungary, believed to have passed through Cuba, where he was suspected to have had a short chat with President Fidel Castro, his Cuban counterpart, was deposed by the hardlined faction of the PRG and army on October 13, 1983. Maurice Bishop placed under house arrest. It seemed to have started with a violent disagreement and split in the ranks of the Politburo and Central Committee, with OREL members seemingly having the greatest say. The army moved on the side which Bernard Cord was said to be the leader of in the power struggle with Bishop. On the evening of Wednesday, October 12, 1983, the Prime Minister was placed under house arrest. Foot soldiers like Selwyn Strawn, the PRG's mobilization minister, was seen moving from workplace to workplace in St. George's, telling workers that Bernard Cord had taken over as Prime Minister since Bishop was no longer capable of running the government. The response was that of rejection and spontaneous shouts, "We don't want Cord." Bishop was accused of not being a true revolutionary, and Grenadians were reminded that the army would tolerate absolutely no manifestation of counter-revolutionary activities. Bishop's house arrest was for 6 days at his official residence at Mount Welldale, with a commanding view of the city and surroundings. Sadness coupled with confusion ruled the minds of Bishop's supporters. It was to them, as one man put it, changing the chief without informing the tribe. People, for the most part, were prepared for anything except to agree to have Bernard Cord replace Maurice Bishop. Since the revolution was perceived to be irreversible, people were prepared to settle for Bishop, whom they considered the lesser of two evils when compared to Cord. They therefore took to the streets and demonstrated in their numbers. A source close to what is now regarded as reformed RMC elements is recorded as having said that during Bishop's incarceration, efforts were made to keep him as far as possible from the resident Cuban ambassador Julian Rizzo. A coming together of both could have sparked a decisive response from Cubans who may have acted similarly as they did in the Angolan conflict. The worst could have happened since the Cuban construction workers at Point Salines were generally believed to be men from the front line in Angola who were using this airport construction assignment to reorient themselves before returning to Cuba. the fervor with which opposition to the thought of Bernard Cord assuming leadership of Grenada was received forced him, Bernard Cord, to resign from the position of Minister of Finance and Trade. An additional reason given related to the rumor that he and his wife were plotting to kill Maurice Bishop, which he termed a vicious lie. An announcement came on Radio Free Grenada, the official mouthpiece of the People's Revolutionary Government, that following the announcement of the resignation of the Minister of Finance, that Mr. Nazim Burke, a young, bright economist, had been appointed Minister of Finance. More speculation mounted as things became even more unclear. Unison Whiteman, the People's Revolutionary Government's Minister of Foreign Affairs, was on official business in the U.S. and in transit in Barbados while on his way back. On Saturday, October 15th, Frederick Minister of Fisheries and Agro-Industries, attempted to stir up things a little more with a small crowd through the streets of St. George, asking businesses to close their doors in support of Bishop. He was later arrested by the pro-Cord armed forces. Not only were the people of Grenada confused, but the rest of the region and indeed the world. Never mind the length of time General Hudson Austin took on radio to relate what he hoped may have quelled people's skipping spirits. More sympathy for Maurice Bishop was evoked, and people preferred to accept Bishop as against Cord. The people were eager to take matters into their own hands, and although there were no means of mobilizing the masses other than word of mouth, people's restlessness created assemblies of small groups all over. School children were in the forefront of reaction to the situation. All this time, the government-operated radio station, Radio Free Grenada, was making several announcements relating to no tolerance for anyone who attempts to disturb the peace. That did not deter the people of Grenada, who stood firm and rose up in their numbers on October 19, 1983. Again, students spearheaded the 9 a.m. mass demonstration up Lucas Street to Mount Welldale, the official residence of the revolutionary leader. In the forefront of the crowd was Unison Whiteman, who had by this time returned to Grenada, although he was advised against it by close friends in Barbados. The chaos of the ensuing period contributed to the spontaneous and steady growth of the crowd of demonstrators. Up to the time of the street march, with chants of "We want we leader," there was no hint that the demonstrators had planned to bulldoze their way into the heavily fortified residence to release their leader from house arrest. One thing led to another, and although the sentry fired shots over their heads in an effort to frighten them off, they were overpowered, and both Maurice Bishop and Minister of Education Jacqueline Kreff were freed. It was quite noticeable that the chant of the demonstrators had changed to "We get we leader." This must have created some measure of panic on the part of the hard-lined Marxist-Leninists who were in the armed forces. The crowd then led him to Fort Rupert, where he sought refuge and was treated medically by nurses from the General Hospital. Speculation is rife that treachery was involved in the move to bring Bishop to Fort Rupert, now Fort George. The close to 25,000 people on the streets of St. George's that day were divided between the Market Square and Fort Rupert. The arrival of BTR-60 armored personnel carriers loaded with soldiers and dangerous ammunition was met by loud cheers, which were soon muffled by the sound of heavy artillery fire. Shooting ensued, and the thousands of people up on Fort Rupert found themselves scampering for cover. The adrenaline rush was so powerful that people jumped 40-foot walls like they were stepping over a rock in a yard, while others had a greater challenge to scale much higher walls. Critical cases were admitted to the General Hospital, while the unfortunate leapt to their death. Later on that day, Prime Minister Maurice Bishop, Jacqueline Kreff, Minister of Education, Unison Whiteman, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Norris Bain, Minister of Housing, Vincent Noel, Vice Minister for National Mobilization, Fitzroy Bain, Trade Unionist, Evelyn Maitland, Mechanic, Keith Haling, Worker, were executed against a wall on which was written, "Towards greater discipline in the People's Revolutionary Army." A full list of those massacred is still unknown. The horrible events of October 19th climaxed with an announcement which was made by General Hudson Austin in a rather shaky voice at around 9:10 p.m. He announced the execution of the Bishop faction of the cabinet and made no mention of the other civilians who lost their lives or were badly injured as a result of the unthinkable act of violence against the people of Grenada. He announced the 24-hour curfew, mispronouncing the word curfew, which at least triggered a bit of laughter in such a trying time by the light-hearted, saying anyone seen outside of their homes will be shot on sight. A 16-man Revolutionary Military Council RMC was formed with General Austin as chairman, was also announced to take charge of the country's affairs. The other members of the RMC were Lieutenant Colonel Liam James, Head of Intelligence and member of the Central Committee, Ewart Lane, member of the Central Committee, Tan Bartholomew and Ian St. Bernard, both members of the Central Committee, Chris Stroud, Major in the People's Revolutionary Army, Major Keith Roberts, Major Basil Guy Hagan, Captain Lester Redhead, Major Huey Romaine, Ashley Ram Folks, Rudolpho Gilvey, Ayman Abdullah, Raymond Nelson, Kenrick Fraser, and Leon Cornwall. It is believed that the other members of the Central Committee who worked closely with the RMC were Bernard Cord, his wife Phyllis, and Selwyn Strawn. The events as they unfolded would have no doubt horrified the outside world and must have helped to catalyze or speed up the actions which followed. The 4-day curfew caught many without food in their homes, and the granting of a 4-hour reprieve, though welcomed, was nowhere close to adequate to obtain what was needed, since the queues at the shops and stores and supermarkets were too long. Here ends our sharing of a somewhat comprehensive historical account of the events which constituted the collapse of the Grenada March 13th, 1979 to October 19th, 1983 revolution. Please be advised that the foregoing was taken from Chapter 11 of my still-to-be-published account of the history of Grenada, titled, This is My Island.
La manera que tengo mi corazón. Viva, viva, viva la revolution. Digo, if Cuba had arrested Gordon Austin, America wouldn't have excuse to come in. Llévame a Grenada, llévame. Llévame a Grenada, llévame. Judas, Lucifer and Jezebel mustn't get away.